So I play my fair share of mediocre superhero games, and I was hoping that Square Enix's Avengers would be a nice palate cleanse from the cycle of mediocrity, but guess we're waiting for Spider-Man. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved superheroes, from Batman to the X-Men, even series that aren't based off of comic books like Ben 10, Danny Phantom, the Infamous games. I've loved all types of things from the genre. And with the consistent rise of the MCU, as well as how good of a year it was for Spider-Man in 2018, this love for superheroes has just grown and grown so much stronger over the past couple of years. So you can imagine just how excited I was when Avengers was announced by Square Enix after how much I already loved Insomniac Spider-Man. When it was first revealed, the hype was immense, but as time went on, as with a lot of other people, the hype just kept going down and down and down because Square Enix just didn't show us anything but A-Day for a very, very long time. And then by the time we started getting new footage from the War Table streams, I just didn't want to watch the game anymore. I wanted to have it in my hands so I could try and see how it felt for myself, because they just didn't sell it to me like the Spider-Man combat trailers. And then the beta started. Once my friends and I actually got to play the beta together, our opinions went even further down than they already had been going. So by the time the beta ended, I was very mixed on my opinions of it. I wasn't necessarily regretting my pre-order, but I definitely wasn't excited to play the game anymore. But let's just dive in and see if they improved anything between the beta and the full release. So the beginning of this game is pretty much the same as what is covered in the beta. It just gives you a little bit more with Kamala so that you can understand the state of the world after A-Day, as well as more about Kamala herself. And despite having played it before, as well as seeing it a million times in every trailer for this game, I still really enjoyed the A-Day missions, having the introductory fights with all of the different heroes that you'll be playing through the game. Especially the part where you fight Taskmaster as Black Widow. That fight was really good for me. And in enjoying all of this, it set an expectation for what this game would be going throughout. But the problem is, it didn't end up the way that I was hoping it to be. Because once you get out of what the beta has covered, that's when this starts to take a nosedive. To start off, one of the most detrimental aspects of this game for me was the combat. Out of the 6 playable characters in this game, only about 2 of them are fun to play, in my opinion. Hulk gets very boring to play, as does Kamala. Tony is very awkward for some reason, and then Thor, you barely get the chance to play throughout the game. Cap is pretty good, but still fairly standard. And Black Widow is by far the best, with the most options in combat. The light and heavy attacks are good, the grappling hook is very useful for stringing combos together, and it's just an all-around good time. But the problem is, in a game with 6 characters, I shouldn't only want to play as one of them. And then for someone like me who just wanted to get this game for the single player experience with a side of multiplayer, I'm not going to see 90% of the unlockable skills in this game. The max level you can get in this game for each character is 50, but by the time you finish the campaign, you're barely going to be at level 10 for each character, so you're going to have a fraction of the combat abilities that you can get, and that's where a lot of the fun is locked behind. You won't get any of the special moves, the combos. You're just going to be pressing square, 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 triangle every once in a while, and that's just going to be the entire game for the single player campaign. And speaking of the campaign, this story ends up being very much just multiplayer missions that you play by yourself with a tiny bit of story sprinkled in there. The game really shined for me when it felt like I was playing a single player mission that was designed specifically for the campaign and focused more on the story, but those were very few and far between. I want to say that the missions that fit into this category were A-Day and maybe 3 other missions throughout the 12-hour campaign. All the other times it just ended up being multiplayer mission that you play by yourself with the same amount of enemies that you would have when you play with 4 people. So you just spend the entire mission just taking insane amounts of damage that I feel like I could just do nothing about. There were 20 enemies around me at once shooting lasers from all directions, and I just had to take it. And even when you do have friends to play these missions with, they're just not fun for me. We basically just ended up dragging our feet through these similar types of missions in the beta, and in the full game it's just more of the same. Go here, punch this. Go here, punch this. Stand in this circle, look for a switch. It's just so repetitive and boring. Oh, but it keeps going. I found it so hard to try and pay attention to this story. It just was not gripping, and I feel like it didn't do anything of substance. Kamala was an annoying protagonist for me. I already knew in the beta that I was going to dislike her from the little that we experienced of the story, and then she just ends up getting pushed to the background in the end. In the beginning, she has a somewhat important role in bringing the Avengers back together. She finds Banner and helps him get everything all situated. But after that, once you start getting like Tony back, then Widow, and then Thor, it just becomes the regular Avengers again. Nobody is even concerned with Kamala, and all she does is just run off and do shit, even when Bruce tells her not to do it because it's dangerous. And then she just kind of devolves into somewhat of a irresponsible kid, damsel in distress type character. And then there's this big moment where the Avengers start falling out and arguing, Hulk and Iron Man start fighting, and then Kamala just gets on the intercom and talks to everybody like, you guys are heroes, you gotta save the world. And then that cutscene lasts like 3 minutes. So the conflict that made everybody just leave, fuck off, I hate you Banner, I hate you Tony, don't make me go Hulk on you, it's all resolved in just like 2 seconds. There is no real conflict because they get over it instantly. It's just, why is it done like this? And while we're on the topic, I can have my weird continuity issue where Hulk turns from Hulk to Banner super fast. Where does he get the shield jackets from? In that cutscene where they have the falling out, you see Hulk hop in, transform back to Banner in like a half a second, and he stands up with the jacket. Where did the jacket come from? And this thing just keeps spiraling and spiraling. I feel like they didn't really do anything interesting with the Inhumans and MODOK as well. Those are 2 things that as a casual Marvel fan, I haven't experienced much of, and I wanted to see what they did with them, but MODOK really didn't even feel like he was the main villain of this story. For the most part, you don't even see him throughout the game. You see him in the beginning of the game when Kamala's escaping from New Jersey. You see him every once in a while talking with Monica, and this one cutscene with Abomination that went nowhere. And other than that, he's brought up every once in a while, but not in anything meaningful. Then at the end of the game, he just shows up in this giant mechanized chair, which is typical for MODOK, but it seems like he's lost all of his sense of reason. He had a legitimate reason for hating superheroes, and now it just seems like he's gone mad. There's just so much that just doesn't make sense, things that they bring up and don't go anywhere with, and I'm assuming that it's in multiplayer missions, but I just see that as side content. Put that as required stuff. Abomination's probably out there somewhere. I don't know because I didn't play it. I just find it kind of stupid to like have this story that you're building and then require the 70% of the game being side missions to get the full story. I mean, what's the point of having a campaign if all of the story content is in the side missions, which you get a brief at the beginning, you get a little bit of information at the end? Why not just put it into a concentrated story? I don't even know what the lesson is supposed to be with the story either. How did we get here? Why did we do this? Are people just gonna accept superheroes now? Like, we did blow up a major US city and cause the Inhuman outbreak, So now that they beat MODOK, people just love the Avengers now? There's just so much, it just doesn't make sense. Why was this not structured better? Even with the pieces that they have in this game, there's so much potential for it to be a lot better, but they just didn't go for it. Let's make a multiplayer game. And of course, as to be expected, they're setting up for a sequel with the post-credit scene, but I'm not even sure how excited I should be. Because at the end of Spider-Man, the post-credit scene were with Miles getting spider powers, and then with Harry being in the tube with what we can only assume is the symbiote. But in this one, it's just Monica in a boardroom talking to people. Cool. So this just ended up with me, who loves single player games that are focused on the story, just not even paying attention in the end. Even with the bad superhero games I've played in the past, I'm still paying attention because I love learning more about the whole grand scope of Marvel, but this just had me a head in my hands just waiting for it to end. So all these things added up, from the combat to the story, it just amounts to something that I feel like wasn't worth playing. So this game really just ended up being such a disappointment, man. Like, I know I barely had anything good to say about the game, but it's just not what I wanted. In 2018, when Insomniac Spider-Man came out, it soared to the top of my favorite games list, and I was just hoping that this would be at least half of how much I love that game. But it missed that mark by such a large margin. The story really didn't do anything interesting for me. They severely underutilized the key points of the story, being the Inhumans and MODOK. In the ending, it just jumped off the deep end and just started pulling shit out, and it's like, why? As I said before, I love story-based pieces of media, and I love single player games for that, but this is a classic example of a game that was built for multiplayer that they just added a story into later. Even after writing for this review, I went back to the multiplayer to see if I would enjoy it any more, because obviously it's a multiplayer game, so if I play the multiplayer, I'll enjoy it. But that didn't happen either. It's just the same boring, monotonous gameplay that doesn't work. I haven't mentioned the performance yet, but this game runs pretty bad in certain sections, even on a PS4 Pro. And then there are glitches that don't even let you progress. We had the enemy that we were looking for in the multiplayer missions just disappear. They went underground or something and we couldn't find them, so we had to restart the mission. And after my friend and I beat the game, neither of us can get back into the campaign. We just get stuck in a loading screen. So in the end, this game just ended up being very mediocre, for me to even put it kindly. There were large portions of the game where I was just bored out of my mind and was considering not even finishing the game. A typical thing that I work out in my head these days is, was this game worth the $60? I feel like that's not even the problem here. Even if I only paid $20 for this game, the single player is just an abysmal experience, and the multiplayer is extensive but not quality. There's just not much redeeming for this game in my opinion, and I'm half tempted to put it at the bottom of my superhero games list that I've played so far. Which is weird, because I wouldn't necessarily say this game is bad, it's just not good. I just hope that if we get more from Square Enix with Avengers games, or if the updates that are further down the road are more extensive than just adding the characters to the game, that they really tighten this shit up. I feel like the potential is there, it's just not realized, you know? But with this game having existed, it does make me very interested to see where Marvel Games is going to expand this universe. Who's going to make games? What characters are going to get games? It's very exciting stuff. Hopefully it just delivers. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Avengers for now, so thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to go back to waiting for Spider-Man Miles Morales to come out. See you next time.